Tonight on Chronicle.
I'm overwhelmed and I don't even know if I have words to describe it.
A French chateau in the Blue Ridge Mountains.
An incredible treasure.
A marvel of history.
The history of everything. That's the beauty of it.
America's largest private home.
Always feels good to be here.
Preserving the art of hospitality.
And we want them to feel like they're a guest of the Vanderbilts.
Where George Vanderbilt's dream
It brings back the magic of childhood for me.
turned into a home on a faraway Christmas Eve.
Hello, welcome to Biltmore. Come right in.
Tonight on Chronicle, Biltmore.
Good evening and welcome to Chronicle. I'm Jane Robelo. Nestled on 8,000 acres in the shadow of Mount Pisgah in western North Carolina sits the family estate of George and Edith Vanderbilt. More than a century ago, in the heart of the Gilded Age, the Vanderbilts opened Biltmore to friends and family during a Christmas season, not unlike this one. Now, this private estate is open to the public. More than 1 million guests visit Biltmore each and every year, continuing that cherished Vanderbilt legacy of hospitality. Now, anyone who visits Biltmore Estate walks away with the basic sense of how it all started, but to truly understand the history of Biltmore and the family who lived here, historians say you must look past this magnificent house to a time when this was little more than a mountain and a man with a vision. Tim Waller has our story.
It's family here, so I love it. Right now we're picking for rosé. So.
If the history of Biltmore could be written to include every man, woman, and child who spent their life in service here,
I was pretty much raised here, me and my brothers. There's 6 of us boys.
there would likely be a chapter on Lee Christopher's family,
And my bedroom was the one with the air conditioning in it.
who've been in the employ of the Vanderbilts from the very start.
We're 5 generations here on the estate. My grandmother's father was the one that put the shingles on the house itself. And then also I had another grandfather, Christopher. He actually did the tree cutting for the house to be built.
It took 1,000 men like Christopher's great-grandfathers to build America's largest home. A 175,000 square foot mansion on nearly 200 square miles of land. Yet George Vanderbilt, the wealthy heir to his grandfather's railroad fortune, had smaller aspirations when he first arrived here in 1888.
George Vanderbilt started off wanting to build a modest home. I think the earliest architectural drawings show like a 2,000 or 3,000 or 5,000 square foot house.
That idea flew out the window when Richard Morris Hunt, the famous architect, and Frederick Law Olmsted, the designer of New York's Central Park, were asked by Vanderbilt to consult in the design. Both Hunt and Olmsted saw opportunity.
And I think both Olmsted and Hunt saw in George Vanderbilt the perfect client, the client who was very interested in history and art and wanting to build something meaningful. And of course, it was a client with very deep pockets who was willing to do that. And you have to remember that Olmsted and Hunt were at the very ends of their careers, so they were looking at that time to build their masterpiece.
They got their wish. Over the next 6 years, this architectural masterpiece rose from the ground. A 250-room French chateau with 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, and a library with 23,000 books. Even the drive to the house created a surprise for Vanderbilt's wealthy friends from up north.
You didn't know where you were. You were 3 or 4 miles from the railroad station. You're in the middle of nowhere. These people who came out of Newport or New York probably thought they'd just been beamed to another planet. And then they turned the corner and there's the front of the house. It's like, oh my gosh, we've arrived somewhere special.
But even this wouldn't feel like home to the world's most eligible bachelor until his marriage in 1898 to wife Edith. Her outgoing nature and ability to relate to people of all backgrounds gave Biltmore a new spark.
I know she used to visit families that lived on the estate. If a baby was born or if someone was sick, she'd take supplies to them that they would need. And sometimes she'd just go by and visit and take packets of seeds just for their garden.
It was a match made in heaven, and soon George and Edith became the proud parents of daughter Cornelia. They were the first family of this cherished estate, which extended as far as the eye could see.
Vanderbilt's land was so vast, a huge responsibility came with it. Tree cutting was rampant in the late 19th century, and he knew he'd have to do something to protect all this beauty for future generations.
It was here modern forestry, as we know it today, was created by a man named Gifford Pinchot. Pinchot's conservation techniques were so advanced, President Theodore Roosevelt hired him away from Vanderbilt for the job of a lifetime.
He became the first forester of the U.S. Forest Service, and with our permission, he took all of our techniques that we had pioneered and turned it into the U.S. Forest Service. And as you're looking at something that's most important, setting the timetable, probably advancing it 30, 40 years, because sustainable agriculture was certainly in our future. It was just how far out in the future was it going to be, and he moved that forward quite a bit. And I think of all the things that he did, that's got to be the most important.
Years later, after Vanderbilt's death, this cradle of forestry became public land. Edith Vanderbilt sold 87,000 acres to the federal government, which gave birth to the Pisgah National Forest. It was a way to honor her late husband's love of the land.
Edith knew in her heart, she knew that what she was doing was good for the country, and it was something that her husband would have wanted her to do.
In fact, wondering what Vanderbilt would think about all this has become a favorite pastime around here.
We ask ourselves, what in the world would he think of this? And it'd be interesting to walk around with him now and ask that question.
I'd like to ask them if they think we're doing a good job. I'd like to know that they were okay with what we're doing. That would be for me.
Biltmore doesn't just have a backyard or a front yard. It's home to a park. Even the drive to the house is an experience, a 3-mile tour through deliberate, lush landscaping that acts as a grand curtain, preparing you for the main attraction that is Biltmore House. Our Mike McCormick has more on the groundwork.
Whether you fall in love with the estate in autumn,
bright, colorful, extravagant,
or you spring for a visit to bask in the brilliant blooms,
fresh. It's all the colors are fresh.
You will have to hold on to your breath.
The colors of the flowers are blowing me away.
At Biltmore.
When they say ooh or ah, you're like, yeah, we got them.
Tall tulips,
quintessential spring, Easter basket colors,
rows of roses stemming from 250 varieties,
just beautiful, incredible variety,
mounds of mums,
it's an ocean of color,
the walls,
nothing like it,
the water. The view can make time stand still, and it can give your feelings wings.
We want them to feel a certain emotional connection, a certain sense of place that this is not like any other place they've been.
Parker Andes, the director of horticulture, started with Biltmore 15 years ago.
It makes me one of the younger people on the crew, actually.
There are 60 people on that crew full time.
This is Claire.
They don't just pull weeds and clear the land.
You feel a sense of history, and you feel a sense of it's just your turn.
They nurture a legacy planted 120 years ago.
That's probably one of the most enjoyable and one of the most difficult challenges of my job is maintaining the design intent, making sure that the guests today see and feel that same emotional connection to the landscape that George Vanderbilt's guest felt.
That kind of feeling didn't just grow on these branches. George Vanderbilt brought in the best of the best, landscape architect and family friend Frederick Law Olmsted.
It's interesting because Central Park was Olmsted's first major landscape design, and Biltmore was his last.
Bill Alexander is Biltmore's landscape and forest historian. He came here 37 years ago.
And I keep discovering new things about it as every week goes by.
Alexander says letters sent between Olmsted and Vanderbilt detail a plan for the colorful carpet you can't miss and the trees you might look past.
At that time in America, a lot of people felt that the forests were endless and that we would never cut all of the forest, and so therefore why bother to replant and manage? And that bothered Olmsted.
Olmsted convinced Vanderbilt to branch out and use his green to preserve nature's.
Biltmore was largely an experiment in forestry.
In 1898, Biltmore started the nation's first school for training professional foresters. It also became home to the first scientific forest management plan in the U.S.
I've watched trees that I personally planted 35 years ago now are 60 feet tall and birds nesting in them.
Planning has always been the root of the natural beauty here. It's no accident that you see the house in the water, a reflection of the long-term vision still in action today.
It takes a lot of thought to not make, as one of the gardeners said, to not make a historic mistake.
While you will see the gorgeous greens and captivating colors on any given day in the gardens, what you won't see is the work that's going on here behind the scenes. In October, they buried bulbs, tulips and daffodils that'll bloom next spring. And they don't just plant ahead.
In the shrub garden, we've got plans that we started on 3 and 4 years ago to replace a tree.
It's a growing game, more than a century in the making. But like the view here,
it's amazing.
This is great.
It never gets old.
I do a lot of what I do for the beauty of it and for other people's enjoyment of the beauty. Though I can tell you that when I get to walk through with my wife sometimes, we've been known to sneak into the gardens in the evening and actually have a picnic in the rose garden. So a lot of it's for me too.
Biltmore's recipe for success.
So I'm a blend girl.
From the vineyard to the fields.
Delicious risotto.
To your table when Chronicle continues.
George Vanderbilt's love of collecting included wine. His wine cellar was full, and decades later his grandson renewed the wine tradition by planting the first grapevines on the estate. In fact, we're here at the wine library at Biltmore, where they keep a bottle from every vintage they've produced since opening a winery 30 years ago. As Gabrielle Komorowski shows us, much of the work still happens right here at Biltmore.
On a golden fall morning, bright and early, after months of growing and waiting, it's time. These rows of fat, juicy Cabernet Sauvignon grapes are ready to be picked, but the work takes a while.
In order to keep the high quality, they must be hand harvested.
So each fall, the Biltmore Estates Vineyard hires around 40 seasonal employees to harvest more than 100 tons of grapes by hand. These huge piles eventually turn into this.
Cabernet Franc.
It is a massive operation.
We have 1.7 million bottles that we currently produce.
The winery at Antler Hill Village was Biltmore's dairy in the 60s and 70s. George Vanderbilt's grandson wanted a change that still honored the estate's agricultural heritage.
It's the idea of having a working estate.
But at first, not everyone believed a winery in North Carolina could succeed.
There's over 100 wineries now, and at that time, I think we were about one of 5.
Pinot Grigio, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc. It was all new, we have to experiment.
Biltmore's winemakers have turned experiments into an extraordinary success for 30 years now, producing around 45 different wines.
So now we have a mix of reds, whites, rosés, and also sparkling wines.
The Riesling, it's semi-sweet.
Close to 600,000 people visit and taste the wine every year.
We have a Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon and a Malbec.
Making it the most visited winery in the country.
It's very good.
I love them. Yeah, so I'm a blend girl, white wine blend. It was delicious.
We have to taste them again just to make sure that they're still as good as they were, and they always are.
And much of that taste is grown right here at Biltmore,
Cabernet Sauvignon,
where the tradition of hospitality lives on.
Enjoy. And I want people to have a big smile on their face when they're tasting the wine.
Cheers.
And if they don't have it initially, I will find a wine in those 45 that'll make them happy. Just a matter of time.
Biltmore purchases grapes for some of its wines from other wineries in North Carolina, California, and Washington. Although the majority of the Biltmore wine is bottled right here at Biltmore, a small portion is also bottled in California. Now, wine is not the only toast to history here. Every meal at Biltmore begins with one key ingredient: tradition. As our Mike McCormick shows us, the food may take you back in time, but it's as fresh as it can get.
The view is so peaceful on the west side of the estate, even the morning fog wants to take its time passing through. Early on this day, it's a break for the birds, breakfast for the pigs, and just plain fast.
Sometimes it's hectic.
For Eli Herman.
Fresh, healthy food is important to me.
He started at Biltmore 35 years ago, not knowing it was an act of homegrown fate.
I was talking to my grandmother and she said, well, your great-grandfather worked with Vanderbilt, and she sent me a picture of my great-grandfather working in the nursery of Biltmore House when they were growing plants to put in the landscape.
Herman grows plants to put in the 6 restaurants across the estate.
Most food travels over 3,000 miles to get to you, and here we're lucky if it travels 6 miles to get to you.
They call that field to table, and neither the seasons nor the weather can intervene thanks to this greenhouse.
Out of this little area here, we harvest about a little over 20 cases a week of lettuce.
The lettuce grows on thousands of gallons of water.
So it gets 90 plus degrees in the greenhouse, but the water in there stays at about 70 to 72 degrees, and it keeps the lettuce growing.
Herman says controlling the environment makes the lettuce taste better.
It's so tender and sweet that you can just eat it. You don't even need dressing on it.
In the greenhouse, they're also growing edible flowers and experimenting with tomatoes. The plan is to build another one soon.
The chefs are using more than we can grow.
They grow it, harvest it, pack it,
and you could be eating it this afternoon for lunch.
And deliver it.
What do we got today?
All on the same day.
Green lettuce, winter squash, and your macros.
Remember that lettuce? It became a salad star, taking center stage on the lunch table at the bistro.
To be able to talk one-on-one with the person who's raising the product and to know that it's coming from right here on the estate is special.
Paul Clausen is the executive chef here.
I'm going to season it with some salt and pepper here.
He's seasoning and searing lamb.
There we go. We've got a nice hot pan here.
Raised on the property.
We're starting to brown up nicely here.
The meat will marinate in.
It's going to help tenderize it.
Biltmore wine.
We put a lot of effort into raising our own lamb.
They also raise chickens, cows, and pigs. Of the 500 lambs raised on the farm last spring, 200 went from the field to the table.
If you think about it, that's what George Vanderbilt did. He had a diversified farm, and he prided himself in producing all of the food that was consumed on the estate by the family, by guests, and by staff. That was really critical.
Biltmore's Ted Katsianis says sharing was critical too.
We're really recreating the 1895 farm that George Vanderbilt put together.
Vanderbilt's market garden sold fruit and vegetables to the public. The estate also provided a home, barns, a herd of cattle, and garden space for so-called tenant farmers. They paid their rent in fresh milk. Today, animals are sold for breeding, and you can buy the fresh farmed food. Great dinner at special events like Taste of Biltmore Grand Finale at Deer Park Restaurant, or by ordering off the menu.
And I know everything's organic, pretty close to it. It's wonderful. Yeah. And I've never had a bad meal here.
At restaurants like the Bistro or Stable Cafe, which, as its name suggests, was once Vanderbilt's horse stable.
It's only miles away from where you're eating it, instead of being transported across the country. So it's very big, it's huge.
There is a huge hunger for carrying on Vanderbilt's vision.
I certainly hope he would be proud. I would think he would be amazed.
I've never felt like I was pressured to carry that on. It's just kind of been natural.
Natural, like this feast for your eyes that brings a deeply rooted way of life so close you can taste it.
Knowing that since the 1800s, this has been something that's been evolving and growing is something that I take a lot of pride in, and to be able to contribute to that is really cool for me.
Preserving America's largest home.
You don't get scared or nervous, because if you got too scared, you would break some.
And the priceless treasures inside. Behind the scenes at Biltmore, next on Chronicle.
It's impossible to visit Biltmore House without imagining what it would be like to live here. But can you imagine keeping a place like this clean, or keeping all of those artifacts in tip-top shape? Tim Waller shows us a side of Biltmore that guests never get to see.
On a rainy morning before the guests arrive,
Okay, might as well get this one first.
Dina Gasperson goes where few are allowed.
Makes me feel good to come in here and dust and clean.
Her job is to clean Biltmore's priceless treasures, which requires a careful touch.
You just relax and you don't get scared or nervous, because if you got too scared, you would break some.
Keeping the house spotless is a job that involves an army of housekeepers,
We dust all day long.
working 3 shifts per day, 365 days a year.
This house gets extremely dusty, and the main reason is because of our visitation. You know, we have a lot of guests come in, especially this time of year, wearing sweaters and things like that, and lint and dust and pollen in the spring.
Something is always creating dust inside America's largest home, but age also leaves its mark, and some artifacts are more susceptible than others.
Textiles just don't hold up, and wallpapers, and so we work to preserve the originals, and they're in storage, but then we go to great efforts to reproduce them so that what guests are seeing is 100% a reproduction of the original.
When Papour and his team replaced the wallpaper and fabrics in the Louis XV guest room on the 2nd floor, they went to the same company in France that George Vanderbilt hired more than a century ago and had them reproduce it on the original looms.
It took them, 2.5 years to weave the 200 yards that was needed for the Louis XV room, the red and gold velvet that you see on the walls and the draperies and on the bed.
Preservation is the key at Biltmore. Even this ridge cap, high up on the roof, is a carefully handcrafted replica. The only thing Biltmore can't recreate is the dust, but even that is taken care of.
I feel like this is my home away from home, and I take care of it.
The Vanderbilt family hosted the fictional Crawley family this year. Costumes from the popular PBS masterpiece series, Downton Abbey, came to Biltmore. Downton Abbey tells the story of a family and staff on a large estate in the early years of the 20th century. So bringing the pieces here was a natural fit.
It brought the house to life.
From lavish gowns of lace and beading to elaborate headpieces of feathers and jewels, America's largest home played host to Downton Abbey.
But it's just so cool to see the costumes, and it's so cool to see them in a setting that is real.
Inspired by real life at Biltmore and the fictional show.
Watching Downton Abbey has sort of helped me understand a little better the way that this house functioned back in the day, because it was very parallel to what was going on with that fictional Downton Abbey series.
More than 40 costumes from the Dressing Downton exhibit were showcased in rooms throughout the Biltmore house.
People could actually then imagine, that people were gathering for dinner in their formal wear and ready to, have a nice evening together.
It is the perfect fairy tale location.
How Biltmore turns hundreds of weddings into a fairy tale.
Everything is just so spectacular.
When we come back to Chronicle.
The tradition of weddings at Biltmore was started by the Vanderbilt family almost a century ago when Cornelia Vanderbilt was married here. She started a tradition still honored by hundreds of couples every year. Here's Gabrielle Komorowski.
91 years ago, wedding bells rang at Biltmore. George and Edith Vanderbilt's daughter Cornelia married John Cecil on April 29, 1924. The wedding party stood together for a picture in the tapestry gallery of the Biltmore house, and Cornelia posed for her formal wedding portrait at the foot of the grand staircase. Stories of Cornelia's wedding reception, attended by close to 1,000 people, have been passed down in the family.
She had her wedding breakfast in the Winter Garden, and that is really the first of the family weddings to occur in the house.
Decades later, there is still something that makes this place so special for a celebration.
We visited a few places, but it was, as soon as I came here, it was for sure the Biltmore. It is the perfect fairy tale location. It really is. It's just, the grandeur, the mountains, the trees, everything is just so spectacular. Our rehearsal dinner was here in Lioncrest.
Julie and Adam Moreland were married here in June of 2014.
We've had several people tell us that we ruined weddings for them because they'll never ever go to a more amazing wedding than ours. Which is kind of a really neat thing to hear.
Around 200 weddings are held at Biltmore each year. From huge, elaborate parties hosting hundreds to small, intimate gatherings. Although it doesn't happen often, Biltmore can host up to 9 weddings at 9 different venues in a single day.
Each of our venues is essentially its own company. It has its own chef, its own pastry chef, its own banquet supervisors, its own staff.
It is a well-oiled machine fueled by hospitality.
We may not be related by blood, but we are all a family, and it takes all of us to do the weddings that we do here. And we want our guests to feel as though they're coming in and being a part of that family and sharing their memories with us for years to come.
Couples come from around the country and close to home. In April of 2013, my husband Andy and I were married at Biltmore, joining the long list of couples who love to come back and relive the memories from that happy day in a place that is steeped in tradition.
Weddings are no longer held in the main house, and these days it's rarely used for events in order to protect and preserve the house for the guests.
Taking the Biltmore experience,
it's like riding a bicycle. You just get used to it and take off.
To the great outdoors. Next on Chronicle. We now return to Chronicle Biltmore.
Keeping up the estate's elegance and beauty comes at a price, and that's where the business of Biltmore comes in. From the ability to take the elegance of Biltmore to your home, to spending nights on the estate just like the Vanderbilt's guest, the Biltmore brand is big business, much more than a house and gardens. Here now with that story is our Liz Loheis.
From the very beginning, the Vanderbilts have been in the business of hospitality.
Welcome to Biltmore.
The same kind of touches George Vanderbilt gave guests in 1895.
Brought to Biltmore House by horse and carriage, and all their luggage would be delivered to the back door.
Echoed at the inn more than a century later.
It's a balance. You have to continue to move forward and grow the business, and yet be true to our roots and our culture.
A hunger for history in a continuing story, a real-life fairy tale, some might say.
When you interact with Biltmore, you become part of this story, and it becomes part of your life.
A story filled with wonder.
Speechless. It's beautiful.
The hotel is probably the best you can find in North Carolina.
While you can't take this amazing view with you, there are many accents and designs inside that you can bring home. Biltmore is celebrating 25 years in the home furnishing business.
This headboard is Biltmore for your home. This tufted bed bench is also Biltmore for your home.
They are getting luxury, and they're getting really a piece of the Biltmore home that they can really take home with them.
From rugs to bedding, chairs, lamps, and frames.
They're getting this connection to the place and to the ideals that George Vanderbilt set out when he created Biltmore.
Biltmore for your home is sold in more than 8,000 stores across the country.
So when you walk into that home department, the story of Biltmore is everywhere.
Belk sells more Biltmore goods than any other store in the U.S. It's the store's 10th year of carrying the brand.
We lead every flow, every planogram with Biltmore first.
Haywood Mall Belk store manager Jason Shuttlecotty says the Biltmore for your home brand is one of the highest quality lines in the store.
I actually bought a king-size Biltmore down comforter.
Bedding is by far the best seller.
When I come to Belk, I look for products like what I would see if I was staying at the Biltmore.
You can even bring home parts of the holiday tree.
It's America's first castle, so we want to imitate that.
The business of Biltmore isn't just booming, it's expanding. A new hotel nestled in Antler Hill Village opened at the beginning of December.
So it's really for guests that want to be in the hub of everything.
A feel different from the inn, the hotel focuses on Biltmore's history and agriculture.
Really takes its inspiration from the location down in the village near the farmyard, the winery, and of course it used to be a dairy.
With more than 200 rooms and 9 suites, Village Hotel will accommodate more of the 1.2 million guests Biltmore gets each year.
This is a farm-mile tractor from the 40s.
A larger-than-life business.
I actually played on it when I was a kid up here. So.
run by an even larger family.
I feel like I'm part of the Cecil family. I feel like that my family goes all the way back to the Vanderbilts because our family's been here and it just seemed like we keep growing with it.
A booming business where tradition is the trend.
Antler Hill Village has quickly emerged as the hub for dozens of activities here at Biltmore, including segways. These activities help celebrate Biltmore's past while ensuring the estate's future. Here's Mark Dofer.
Biltmore's backyard, an 8,000-acre experience.
Everything we do is tied historically to what the Vanderbilts did.
Here, experiences aren't much different than they were a century ago.
This experience that we're able to provide our guests is of the same quality that Mr. Vanderbilt's guests would have experienced back in the day.
More than 100 years after the birth of Biltmore, dozens of activities give guests the opportunity to play like a Vanderbilt.
And these are also some of our horse pastures that we're riding along.
The occasion to surround yourself in the nature of North Carolina.
Isn't that beautiful? Once you crest the hill and see it, I mean, that's just when people's jaws drop and their eyes get big, and it happens for me every single time I go out there.
It's a chance to see Biltmore as it was seen in the beginning.
That's what George provided to his guests. Other things to do. Do something you can't do in New York City or Washington, D.C. or Richmond, or let's get outside.
The activities here at Biltmore reflect George Vanderbilt's love of nature. They also show off his love of innovation. George Vanderbilt was one of America's first car enthusiasts. More than 100 years later, the people here at Biltmore are still pretty passionate about cars. Climbing through the Carolina countryside.
So this is actually one of our west side sporting clays trail.
The Land Rover experience takes you deep into the lush landscape around Biltmore.
What's great for us is that being partnered with Biltmore, we have 3,000 acres worth of terrain to use. And for the driving school itself, it's a very unique amenity that they get to offer their guests as well. You're going to feel the steering wheel want to pull left and right on you. This is not high school driver's ed.
Spatial awareness is key. So, turn this puppy on. All right, come towards me, Michael.
Education and transportation combined in one of Biltmore's newest additions.
Now go ahead and stop for me. There you go. See, that's not too bad.
We got to teach them how to ride so they're safe, and then they're excited to learn about the history while on a Segway.
Off-road Segways combine terrain and tour.
So it's a great way to see the estate in a very easy way. I like to call it a couch on wheels because the Segway is doing all the work for you. All you gotta do is just stand up, hold on, and have a good time.
Even these quirky cruisers connect back to the birth of Biltmore.
George had one of the nicest cars in the country at the time. He was into transportation. And if he were alive today, he may own a Segway.
He wanted this to be a complete mirror image of the house.
Biltmore's collection of activities aren't meant to distract from the estate's main attraction. They're designed to enhance your experience. The house makes Biltmore an attraction. The activities make George and Edith Vanderbilt's home a destination.
I think he would be speechless. I think he would be surprised and proud and just completely overwhelmed with the amount of growth this place has had. This is exactly what he had in mind.
At Biltmore, pastimes are meant to stand the test of time.
With 8,000 acres, Biltmore Estate is considerably smaller than its original 125,000 acres. But even though the property is smaller, there are more activities here than ever before, and with new experiences on the horizon.
My take on Biltmore is that they've created pretty much Asheville.
When Chronicle continues, Biltmore's success on the estate and beyond.
Here in the mountains, Biltmore is known as the gift that keeps on giving. And as Mike McCormick shows us, you don't even have to step foot on the property to realize that.
A Cabernet would be a little bit heavier, a Pinot Noir is a little bit lighter.
Before you buy a bottle or even take a sip of Biltmore's heritage at the winery,
Yeah, we do have a Pinot Noir.
stop for a second
Do you want a basket too?
and meet the people who are among the real fruit of the estate's existence.
I am my husband. Oh, then he's your basket. I've always enjoyed coming here, and now I get a chance to work here, so I'm very excited.
How many hours are you looking for?
We first met Colleen Giesenschlag at this job fair in September.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
The goal on this day, hire 75 people.
You can really build a career for yourself and stay for as long as you'd like to.
You ready for somebody else?
Scott McLean led the process. He says Biltmore hires 600 to 700 people per year.
Come on back. It is not uncommon to have people who've worked here 10, 20, 30, 40 plus years, which I think is a rarity in this day and age, and it really makes it a special place to be.
I think the Moscato. Let me double check for you.
Colleen Giesenschlag got hired on the spot. Now she's one of the 2,000 people on staff.
Let me go check for you.
That job fair happened at the corporate office in downtown Asheville, which is an example of how the company breathes life into the city. In a way, only Asheville's curb culture could.
It just looked like it would be a really interesting place to see.
Donna and Jim Samasco came from Connecticut with hopes of a Biltmore visit.
You know how the other half lived in those big, gorgeous houses.
But first, they stopped downtown.
Biltmore and the mountains themselves are the two leading pieces of motivation that generates visitation to this area.
Marla Tambellini with the Convention and Visitors Bureau says the company behind that mountainous mansion isn't just one of Western North Carolina's largest employers. She says it's also the reason this area is a year-round destination, a title it couldn't always claim. In 2014, 9.8 million people visited Buncombe County.
Biltmore really helped put Asheville on the map in many ways.
And speaking of putting Asheville on the map, the proof is right here inside the chocolate fetish. And we mean that literally.
It's actually something we're doing for a special order for the Chamber of Commerce.
Biltmore's made its mark on Asheville the way this white chocolate does on this dark chocolate North Carolina.
I think a lot of people are introduced to Asheville because they come to go to the Biltmore, but then maybe they come back on a future vacation. I want to talk a little bit about what to look for when you're looking for a high quality chocolate.
Elizabeth Foley says Biltmore is a real treat.
Of course, the easiest thing to do if you're looking for a high quality chocolate is just to come here.
For her family's chocolate shop.
A lot of customers that we help say that they're either going to the Biltmore or have been to the Biltmore. We have these name cards.
Look at this. The holiday table display of edible name cards at the Chocolate Fetish honors the Vanderbilt family.
So we have Edith, George, and Cornelia.
Feast your thoughts on this.
My take on Biltmore is that they've created pretty much Asheville.
The owner of the Italian restaurant Strata.
We make it, the downtown area, a fun place to be, and they draw the people in.
Says Biltmore doesn't just feed him customers.
So they're a great partner and a great leader to aspire to be like.
That family-owned company shows him what his could be like.
They're just like us, only a lot bigger.
Size comes with a benefit for everyone.
They promote Asheville, I think, just as great or greater than the city or the chamber.
The Asheville Advertised Now also got some of its look from the estate artisans who stayed around. They designed and created pieces of the city's architecture and even area roads. George Vanderbilt wanted Buncombe County roads in good enough condition to support his love for automobiling. So you can't drive through Western North Carolina without seeing or hearing.
Oh, we want to see the Biltmore.
The ways Asheville built more.
Now I see business all year round.
Through the Biltmore.
They actually care for the people and give back to the community, and it's not just about profits.
Biltmore's reach goes beyond Asheville. In fact, you can spot parts of the estate in more than 15 major motion pictures. Films like Being There, Last of the Mohicans, Hannibal, and even parts of Forrest Gump were filmed here. And Biltmore's the subject of many books, most recently the best-selling Serafina and the Black Cloak, written by one of Asheville's own.
Okay, it's a little spooky for the end of the night. So I've just always loved Biltmore Estate.
For Asheville author Robert Beatty.
I go there with my family all the time, and whenever we go there, our imaginations run wild.
Serafina and the Black Cloak is just the beginning.
We just think there should be stories here, so we imagine this story of a little girl, a very intriguing, unusual girl who lives down in the basement of the estate and kind of sneaks around and prowls and listens in on conversations and sees the Vanderbilt guests.
The book is on multiple bestseller lists, New York Times, Amazon, USA Today, and Barnes & Noble.
To never let herself be seen.
There's even a trailer for the mystery thriller series with 4 million views and counting.
It's kind of like a little Downton Abbey mixed with a spooky mystery.
The next book, Seraphina and the Twisted Staff, is a Disney leading title for 2016. Disney has even bought a third book in the series.
How years of planning bring the magic of Christmas.
You just cannot believe how enormous this tree is.
When Chronicle continues.
Christmas kicks off at Biltmore each year with some hard work, as a team of 40 employees use ropes and pulleys to hoist a huge tree into place in the banquet hall of Biltmore House. The raising of the great tree ushers in the season of celebration. It's just one of many traditions that makes Christmas such a special time at Biltmore. Here's Gabrielle Komorowski.
Long before the carols are sung and the lights are strung on the big tree in the banquet hall, an idea sparks here.
There's some pansies, there's some sunflowers.
Where the Christmas spirit can't be contained, even in the heat of the summer.
Usually we know our Christmas themes 4 or 5 years out.
It's going to go on top of the big tree in the banquet hall.
A garland for the damask bedroom tree.
The floral team, the creative brains behind Biltmore's busiest time of year, full of Christmas cheer year-round.
Let's just put it this way, I have not worked here a day in my life. I mean, it's like every day is fun.
When we met Lucinda Ledford in July, she showed us
you're just gonna shiver when you go in this room.
Her plans for Christmas.
With icicles and snowflakes.
To turn the music room in the Biltmore house into a winter wonderland.
I actually have a pair of old ice skates that I have gilded. The idea actually came from a part of a book that described Cornelia Vanderbilt ice skating on the pond during the winter with her friends.
Hello, welcome to Biltmore. Come right in.
And now that we're in the Christmas season, there are those gilded skates on the mantle here in the music room. In fact, every decoration you see in the Biltmore house is planned, often years in advance, and researched. Many are inspired by stories about the Vanderbilt family. Every year, the decorations tell different stories.
It brings back the magic of childhood for me.
This year's theme is a Gilded Age Christmas. The house has come alive with shimmering light, and guests of all ages are filled with wonder.
And you just cannot believe how enormous this tree is until you're standing next to it.
This great tree in the banquet hall is 35 feet tall, and yes, it is real.
Oh, you smell the balsam.
People smell and see this symbol of the family traditions that started in the season of 1895 when George Vanderbilt opened his house to guests on Christmas Eve.
So traditionally, you can't get any more authentic than that. And he decorated the home, and he had the big Christmas tree in the banquet hall. And
they still hang boxes on the big tree to honor the Vanderbilt tradition of buying gifts for the children of the staff. The boxes are empty now, but George Vanderbilt's great-grandchildren honor that spirit of giving.
I got to be an elf one year, and that was the most fun, handing out the packages to the children. And by the way, I think I'm going to sign up for that again. I think I've been missing that.
And there's a more modern tradition of hiding a common unlit light bulb somewhere on the tree.
It takes me days to find it. And then when I do see it, I'm like, oh, it's so apparent.
We found it, but we won't tell you where.
Even though it's a big place and it's big property, lots of people, you want it to feel like it could be your own house. It could be something you could do. And it could be how you want to welcome your own guests during this festive time of year, this holiday season.
120 years ago, George Vanderbilt's family members were the first guests at Biltmore. The thousands of visitors are now family too, invited to share the magic and warmth of this season.
It's just a beautiful experience for people to come to Christmas at Biltmore.
From the beautiful blooms of springtime to the garland and lights of another Christmas season, We found in our year at Biltmore, there is always something happening, no matter the season. And that speaks to the success of this place. It's a great combination of history, beauty, and activities for the entire family. 120 years after that first Christmas season, George Vanderbilt's mountain home is still welcoming visitors with a promise of hospitality and never a boring moment. Thank you for joining us for Chronicle Biltmore. I'm Jane Robelo. Good night.